You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, well, hello, everybody, and welcome to, of course, another edition of Head to Head Star Wars podcast. Of course, as you could probably clearly see, just one head today, at least so far. Haven't heard from Daryl. Saw him earlier. He indicated he was going to be on, so I can only hope that maybe he's having some sort of maybe some sort of a technical issue or something like that he's trying to address, and he hasn't been able to reach me. But you know what? Show must go on, right? So I'm here, and it looks like today what we're going to be talking about is this talk of a new Star Wars trilogy. Now, of course, a lot of people have been talking about this as of late. We're going to go through this a little bit, discuss it a little. You know, of course, you're welcome to come in on the chats. Obviously, if you're just watching this thing on a rebroadcast or whatever, then definitely leave a comment in the comment section because we keep the discussion going there. And as an unprecedented move, I'm going to do something that I don't usually do. And I'm this time, right from the beginning of the video, I'm going to say, for the first time anyway, make sure you hit that subscribe button and hit that like button if you like what we're doing, you like discussing Star Wars, because that's really what this show is about. We come on the show, usually there's two of us, and we discuss Star Wars. That's pretty much what it is. Every Monday, every Friday, live at 8 o'clock, we come on, we discuss some Star Wars. So, again, tonight, it's basically about, is there a new trilogy coming? And like I said, this one's coming from InsideTheMagic.net, and it's really talking about the possibility of not anything that's going to replace the sequel trilogy, because obviously Disney spent a lot of money on the sequel trilogy. They're not going to want to replace that or anything like that. Now, earlier we did report that they were thinking of making Heir to the Empire the first Disney Plus film. And to be honest, I haven't heard anything new about that. If you guys have heard something new about it, let me know. But so far, I haven't heard anything new coming down the pike about that. I haven't even heard anything new about a Disney Plus movie. It's all about the series, it seems, with them. So, I mean, we'll just have to see how that shakes out, as we said in the show. And if you guys haven't checked out that show, you can go back and look. I mean, essentially, the playlist that you're going to want to look for is, we have our podcast episodes, which is our Friday show, and then, of course, we have the Monday show, which is Cantina General Discussion. I might actually retitle those at some point. But basically tonight, you know, it's pretty much, hey, and Ronaldo's with us. Hey, Jedi Master Eric. Hey, Ronaldo. You know, thanks for jumping on. Appreciate it. You know, you might have to help me get through this one, because again, this was not a planned thing. It was not planned for me to go solo tonight. So, help me, Padawan Ronaldo. Actually, you might be a Jedi Master level by now. I think we're gonna elevate you to Jedi Master tonight. But again, I think that it's interesting that they're talking about possibly doing this new sequel trilogy. You've been hearing a lot of buzz about this, that there's this new sequel trilogy coming. But what does that actually mean? And the answer is, like I was saying, I don't think that they're going to actually reboot the sequel trilogy that we got. They spent far too much money on it. They have too much at stake. It would probably irreparably hurt the brand if they actually went out and tried to say, hey guys, you remember episode 7, 8, 9? Well, just kidding. We're going to bring you this version of 7, 8, and 9. That wouldn't fly. Now, what's interesting about this article, again, it's on InsideTheMagic.net, and as you guys know, a lot of times what we do is for various topics, we're like you guys. You know, we're watching other YouTube channels, we're reading a bunch of websites, you know, we're all the official channels, of course, that come down. we're basically reading this stuff and reacting to it. And so we basically found that this article was really interesting because this goes back to something that I've been talking about for a long time, and that is softly rebooting the sequel trilogy. And by that, what I'm actually talking about is not necessarily saying, okay, disregard episodes 7, 8, and 9 as you know them. Here's the new episodes 7, 8, and 9. Instead, I think what's going to happen is you're going to see a soft reboot, which is really more all these Disney Plus shows that they're seeding out. Remember, they actually named this era, by the way. They now call it the New Republic era. So this point that's taking place between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens is basically now being deemed the New Republic era. And so what's happening is you're starting to get a lot of these series and everything. You got Ahsoka, you got the Book of Boba Fett, you've got the Mandalorian. They're coming out with some other stuff. Andor, will be included in that as well. And who knows what they're going to seed out of that, because they're introducing all these characters in these shows that themselves could be seeded out into something. So I think what you're going to see is definitely a soft reboot. So they're not necessarily going to mess with the actual characters and stories of episodes 7 through 9. I think what you're going to see actually is something more akin to, you're going to get this collection of stories from Disney Plus, and it's going to keep moving. And it's going to keep moving in a direction where you don't necessarily have to mess with the stories that episode 7, 8, and 9 brought us, right? You could just keep doing it. So what's going to end up happening is they can tweak the stories, they can retcon them a little bit, they can do a lot of different things where they won't necessarily touch them. And of course, I'm going to go through this article because, again, this is like one of those things that I basically love to just go through with you guys. Like, hey, you know what? Let's all comment on some of the stuff we're reading. A lot of this stuff that we do on the show does just come, we hear things, or maybe we think of some topic we want to discuss. Like when we did the whole de-aging versus recasting. That's something that just came from pretty much what we've seen in these movies thus far. And we decide, let's do a show on that. Sometimes, you get an article that comes by that it's, hey, let's actually talk about it. And we always like to credit the source. So again, this one's coming from InsideTheMagic.net. Ronaldo says, as you said, those are very expensive movies, and it's not wise to just throw all that money away. And again, this is why, and I've said this a million times, this is why you got to be really careful about what you do when you're messing with a franchise like Star Wars, right? You really have to be on your game, because what you do isn't just going to determine the success of these 1, 2, 3, whatever movies that you're releasing in the immediate future, but it's going to basically affect the outcome of the entire franchise for years to come. And by that, I mean future stories. So you have to be really careful. And they more or less painted themselves into a huge corner with this whole thing. It's one of those things where if they had to mess anything up, it really should not have been the sequel trilogy. Because the sequel trilogy is a plot point. And I actually got into this a little bit. I think it was actually on Twitter. Where I was commenting. I don't remember who it was. It might have actually been one of our viewers, to be honest. Maybe even Voyager. Not sure, but I remember there was something that I was commenting on Twitter where, there's just some general discussion about certain things. And they're bringing up, which should I watch first? Should I go Bad Batch or should I go Rebels? Because they were just wrapping up the Clone Wars. And of course, I actually said you should probably watch Rebels first. And the reason why I said that was because you have a situation where you have these cornerstone, or I think I use the analogy of bricks. You have these series or movies or whatever that actually act as bricks. So Clone Wars is kind of like a brick. Rebels is kind of like a brick. And then, the Bad Batch is kind of like the cement that goes in between and sort of binds them together. It's world building. It's expanding the storyline that was established in the Clone Wars. But it's also referencing a lot of things that are coming up in Rebels. So it's kind of doing this. It's kind of like a compendium type of a thing. It's somewhat of a companion piece to these two series. So even though the Bad Batch chronologically is before Rebels, and I mean, you guys can let me know what you guys think in the chat, in the comment section. I guess that depends on if you're watching live or if you're watching the rebroadcast. But let me know what you guys think. Should people watch the Bad Batch first because it's chronological and you can go Clone Wars, Bad Batch, and then Rebels? I mean, you can't really go wrong. I guess you could do it that way if you wanted to. The only problem that I see with that, again, is that I think you would be missing out on some things. Okay, so Daryl's coming online pretty soon. So that's good. Not sure what happened there, but I'm sure he'll tell us when he gets on. So Ronaldo says, I don't think they'll make a reboot. I think they'll tell new stories set between episodes 6 and 7, explaining some things in a cool way. And that's pretty much, I think, if you had to sum up what this episode tonight is going to be about, I think that's what it comes down to. They're going to basically take this 30-year period between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens. They're going to tell a bunch of cool stories in this New Republic era. And they're essentially going to reshape. Because what they could do is they could make something that somewhat takes place during the sequel trilogy that could act as a new sequel trilogy. And then, from there, they could just softly reboot the whole thing. Ronaldo also says, let's see. Also, we've seen other franchises saying, well, this particular story didn't happen. There's no guarantee that it'll work. Then he goes on to say the biggest example is X-Men. Yeah, that's a good point. Some stuff worked, Logan, First Class, but others failed horribly. Days of Future Past, New Mutant, or Dark Phoenix. And this, again, this is going into the whole idea of you really have to plan these things. You have to be careful. You have to not be so haphazard when you're dealing with a big franchise. Because I think that people just don't understand that when you're dealing with a franchise like a Star Wars, like anything in Marvel or DC, not just X-Men, but anything, you really have to be careful. And I think that part of a successful example would be what we've seen in a lot of these, pretty much all the phases, right? Phases 1 through 4. We're currently in phase 4. We're about to hit 5. And so this is something where they obviously, when they put out Iron Man, the very first one back in 2008, and they started releasing, you could tell there was thought, there was a plan, there were different elements that were present during these things that just are simply absent from Star Wars. A lot of times it just amazes me how they've done this whole Star Wars thing. Especially something like the sequel trilogy. And again, we said this on the last show, they're more interested in making a profitable Star Wars film than a good one. And they rushed this thing out. Disney bought this property and they said, look, we want to get this thing out as quickly as possible. We want to start that money train rolling. You know, we want to start getting all this Star Wars content out. And if they had the plan of, hey, you know what, we're going to release one movie per year, because that was the original plan. They were going to do all the saga films, I don't know, I think in, you know, every other year, and then in between those, you would get these standalone films, which actually I thought was a cool idea, but they just bought the thing in 2012, and they kicked out a film in 2015. That might have been a little bit too soon. Now, certainly, 3-year cycle, you know, for any movie, so you're guaranteeing that anything's coming out. What they should have done was they probably should have bought it, worked out everything that they were going to work out, and then from there, write, plan, have a bunch of meetings, you know, do whatever it is you're going to do, and then maybe release something. But the problem is they just wanted to get something as quickly as possible. And of course, you know, look, I mean, the bottom line is if they had waited, we might not have gotten Carrie Fisher for any of the movies. And this, of course, goes back to our discussion about, well, do you recast? Do you, you know, do you de-age? You know, how do you handle this? So I think a lot of this comes from the fact that, you know, it just wasn't planned out, and they backed themselves into a corner. So let's start to go over this article. I honestly don't know, you know, like I said, Daryl texted me, he said he was going to pop on in any minute. I don't know. I don't really know what's going on. I don't know if he's having any kind of a technical issue. I have no idea what's going on. So, you know, if he pops up, we'll get him on. But I want to start going through this thing. So in this article, they basically point out some of the things that I've talked about, that more than likely, you know, they're not going to touch episodes 7, 8, and 9. It was too profitable. It was too established. You want to talk about really confusing the fans if you just nullify it. Now, again, they could do that in the X-Men and any other superhero franchise. And the reason for that is because there is source material for that. There's the comic books. And as you guys know, even casual comic book fans know that the comic books sort of reboot themselves every 10 years or so. So you have different series. You know, for instance, even with Batman, you know, you have the Detectives comics starring Batman. You have the Batman. You had, you know, multiple things like that. With the Spider-Man series, you had the Spectacular Spider-Man, the Amazing Spider-Man. You had a bunch of different things. Whereas I think one of the problems is that with the comics, it was accepted. You can reboot things because the comics did it. And you're always going back to that source material. And you could tell different variations of storylines on it. You could say, hey, okay, this version of the X-Men that we didn't really work. Let's do a new version. Well, that new version can either be based on a different comic series source material, or it could be based on the same source material and just reworked to that director's vision. The problem, though, with Star Wars is the films are the source material. And that's where you have a problem when you actually start to, you know, bring some of this stuff in and you start messing with everything. It's going to be pretty bad. Okay, so now we got Daryl with us. So let's bring him on. All right. You there?
Hey.
All right. Mics are working. Everything is good. That's good. I only basically had to pitch it for like 20 minutes. Nearly 1/3 of the show. What happened to you, man?
Little minor issue. I didn't have my phone to let you know. Otherwise, you know, I would have, but
I would hope so.
Yeah.
All right, but I kind of went through, as you can imagine, tap dancing here, over a lot of stuff, but I didn't really get too deeply into the article. So now Ronaldo's saying, hi, Jedi Master Daryl.
Hey, Ronaldo.
Yeah, so I mean, it's basically talking about just the overview about how they're not going to really reboot the actual movies. They're going to do a soft reboot. And the one thing, I don't know if you even know this, but they basically talked about how they've named this time period between Return of the Jedi and Force Awakens. They call it the New Republic era now. So that's kind of like a new designation. And of course, what this article on inside themagic.net is basically alluding to is something, of course, that I had talked about for a long time, is that instead of actually rebooting the sequel trilogy, in other words, making another 7, 8, 9, they're simply going to continue to tell stories in this New Republic era, and it'll just kind of nullify it. Like, they don't even have to touch the characters or change the story or anything. That could all stay canon. It can happen, right? But they could tell, and it's almost like the road used to go this way, and now you're kind of building it to where it curves off and goes that way, and it'll start running parallel. So it'll still work. And that's basically what I think that they're going to do. With these TV franchises that they have, they're going to do this. And I was, starting to get ready to run down this article. But before I do that, I mean, do you have any thoughts on any of this stuff?
Well, yeah, I mean, like the whole, I like the name of it. I mean, New Republic era. I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah, me too.
So I think that, the sequel trilogy, of course, didn't go as well as we all would have hoped. And I think, so I think that them kind of going around it, I think it might be the best option, where you tell like stories leading up until you get to maybe right before you get to Force Awakens. And then you may be able to actually go around that and tell stories outside of that as well.
Yeah. I mean, and that's pretty much, I think, what they were talking about. So the first part of this article is basically talking about that, right? It's basically saying, like, look, we already have some success with these films. They're all billion-dollar movies. So maybe we just don't erase them. Maybe we retcon them. Retconning is probably the most you might see. And you're seeing that a little bit, like it's a microcosm, but you're seeing an example of this, actually, with the Obi-Wan series as it relates to Episode 4. There's certain things that they're doing that somewhat puts certain things in a different light, or it's kind of like what I mentioned, actually. It was either on our last show, or it was during maybe the review or something. But I remember talking about the fact that they're almost going to get to a point where if they keep playing in that between Episode 3 and 4 sandbox, they're going to have to redo the entire original trilogy just to make the storylines match up. Because, it's no different than if you have a bad leaky roof or whatever. Yeah, you could keep patching it up, but, pretty soon you're actually going to cause more problems than you're going to solve with it. Same thing with a road, if you keep patching that up. Eventually you just have to tear it all down and just rebuild a new one. And I think that if they keep playing in that sandbox, they're going to have to do it. But until then, you're seeing that there's somewhat retconning certain things where the original trilogy can still stand as it is comfortably in canon. After all, it is the center of canon. But there are certain things that have been retconned with it. So I think that, you have to take that into some consideration. And I think that that's maybe an example, what we see from Obi-Wan and some of the stuff like that. They've even done that with the Bad Batch and certain things like that. I think you're going to see that moving into now this New Republic era, which I totally agree. I think it's a great name. And I'm really happy that they chose that. I mean, again, they're making some good decisions lately. So I'm sort of giving them a free pass on some of this stuff. But I definitely agree that they can move forward and it should still be okay. In other words, I think we're still safe. and you can keep the original sequel trilogy the way it is and just kind of retcon and tweak, and you can just sort of maneuver, kind of like what you said, you can maneuver around it. So that's kind of what this first part of this article is talking about. And then they go into the TV series that they have about how Disney has seen success with The Mandalorian, you know, and that it basically created this New Republic era. And they did that because now The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett could actually be separated away from the sequels. They can actually be detached in a way and now can go off in their own direction. They don't necessarily need to be seen as the prequel to the sequels, as it were, which is good. Then it goes on. It's talking about the distancing creates a perfect opportunity for Disney to slowly build up toward a new trilogy of movies that might not be in the Skywalker saga, but still provide a story the fans have always wanted. And Kathleen Kennedy did even acknowledge that in her whole 2020 Investor Day thing. I think it was the Investor Day thing, where she said that, you know, all this Star Wars content that's coming out is going to culminate in this really big, massive thing, like this moment or whatever for the universe. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing what that basically brings us. And then, you know, it then starts to go into various topics, and this is where our discussion could really begin. So the first one is they talk about, you know, why Disney's new Star Wars era matters. You know, it talks about this rebranding, help resituate Star Wars content. It allows The Mandalorian not to be thrown in the same category as the sequel trilogy. And the show and the spin-offs can basically live in their own era. And because they don't necessarily need to have the shows that are taking place in the New Republic era necessarily have to tie to the sequels, you know, it's almost like it's more appealing because if you do that and you distance yourself from that, I think fans will have a better reaction, and The Mandalorian proved that. Because I think that if you came out with like a Finn series or a Rey series, I don't know how many people would watch that. You know, people weren't really into those characters as much. But they're really liking The Mandalorian. You know, they're liking some of these other things. And then you get a show like Andor. And what's interesting about Andor is now you're kind of going backwards and planning it in, right? Because Andor doesn't actually take place during this era. But like Obi-Wan, you're starting to fill in a little bit of gaps between 3 and 4 with live action. But then you fast forward. I think I mistakenly said earlier in the show that it did, and I didn't mean to do that. But the interesting thing is that, so you have Andor, you have Obi-Wan, you have things like that that's taking place before the original trilogy. But at the same time, you had The Mandalorian, you have Ahsoka, you have the Book of Boba Fett. If they ever resurrect Rangers of the New Republic, that would count. So you have some of this stuff. And then, let's not forget, the Rogue Squadron movie is actually supposed to take place after Episode 9. So what they're doing is they're weaving these things around the entire, you know, like the whole sequel trilogy, basically.
The whole sequel trilogy, yeah. I mean, like I said, I think that's the best option. You know, I think that the characters, like I said, I don't know if it's so much the characters that they didn't like. I just think that the story didn't serve the characters well. I think people wanted something different.
You're right, but I just think that, like, if you look at Rey, you know, people didn't like her because they thought she was a Mary Sue, you know? They thought that she was, like, way overpowered, and it just didn't make sense. Finn, people universally agreed that Finn was underused. I think, actually, you're right, though. I think people liked Finn. I think they liked Poe. They liked Kylo, for the most part.
Well, I just think that, like, I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like, the characters themselves, I think is cool. I just think the story that went with those characters,
yeah,
didn't, like, you know, like you said, like, you know, okay, um Ray is too powerful, right? It's like, okay. And I think because it took so long for us to figure out why she's so powerful, and her story was a little, it felt like a little disjointed. And that's what I'm saying. Like, and you got everybody trying to tell one story, but no one's talking to each other. Once again, we keep talking about the planning part. So you got like Brian Johnson, he had his vision of what these characters were, and you have JJ Abrams, who had a vision of what these characters were, and they didn't match up. And so then now, and then of course the biggest thing is like, you gave us Luke Skywalker without giving us the Luke Skywalker that most people wanted to see. So I think that had a big influence on people as to why they didn't care for the sequel trilogy, because everything kind of seemed thrown together. It didn't seem thought out. And I think, like I said, I think people could have, just like we always talked about, like a review of, uh, the Rise of Skywalker, right? Everything, the pacing of it was too fast. There was no sense of danger. There was no sense of like, because you're trying to cram all this stuff in one movie and you're trying to clean up everything. And that's what I'm saying. I think that is really what brought a lot of fans kind of like, okay, what is this? This doesn't feel like Star Wars, because of the fact that, it's not all coming from the mind of George Lucas. So I think that's one of the biggest reasons, is that there was no cohesiveness to the story, and there wasn't really in-depth storytelling, because like you said, we wasted a lot of characters. We wasted Phasma. We wasted, what was the person who knew Poe? That was a spice runner.
Oh,
Like
you know
that
what?
character.
Yeah, I keep forgetting her name.
Yeah, I keep forgetting her name, but like, she was looking like a really cool character.
Yep.
You're introducing all these characters in here, and you're not giving us any real backstory. The one everyone thought that was Lando's daughter or something.
Oh,
That's what I'm saying.
Jana,
Like,
yeah.
Jana, yeah. So it's like you're bringing all this stuff in, yet you're still trying to explain all this other stuff that we're still trying to figure out. It's convoluted, and that's what I'm saying. Like, it just felt like they were rushing to put a Star Wars movie out there instead of really truly understanding Star Wars. And I think if they would have had Filoni and Favreau kind of at the helm of those, and kind of being able to really rein all that in, it would have been fine.
Well,
I don't
I
think
brought
fans
this
would have
up
had a
earlier.
problem.
I don't know if you were on when you. No, probably not, because I think I brought this up a little earlier on, and that is that I made this whole case before you signed on that I think that they actually put the Star Wars films out too soon after they bought Lucasfilm. That what they should have done was bought it in 2012 and then spent a few years actually planning it. Because it's kind of like, and I brought up the fact that we had said that they started to become more interested in putting out a profitable Star Wars movie than a good one. And I basically said, look, what's going on here is that they just had this shiny new property that they were about to resurrect that's a cash cow, and they could not wait to get these movies out to start recouping some of that money they spent buying Lucasfilm. And I think that if what they had, I think that the smartest thing that they could have done is, like I said, buy the thing in 2012, wait a couple years, really plan this thing out, get some people on board. Because it's like, look, if you didn't put out a movie until, say, 2017, 2018, you could have actually started out. You only would have been delaying a couple of years. It's like, look, people had already been without Star Wars now for, at that point, like, 8, 9, 10 years. So just take the time, come up with an actual plan, kind of like what they're doing now, and then start the movies in maybe 2018. And then you could have put out one every year, because like that whole business model of, okay, we're going to put one out every year. Every other year will be a saga film. The years in between that would end up being standalone films. And they probably, if they had started out on solid footing, they probably could have kept that model going. But they rushed it out. They tried to get everything out as quick as possible. And again, I pointed out that, well, okay, if they had done that, we probably wouldn't have had Carrie Fisher in any of the movies. But again, that's where that whole de-aging, recasting thing comes into discussion. And again, like I brought up earlier in the show, if you haven't checked that out, be sure to look under our videos. And it was a really good discussion. I would love to have you guys' opinions on that too. Because like I said, that comment section on all our videos is open. And hey, since I'm talking about this right now, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, help the channel out. If you want to buy us a blue milk, we participate in the Buy Me a Coffee program. So, the link's in the description. There's various packages that you can do if you want to support us monthly, all kinds of stuff. But I think that ultimately, if they had gone that route, I think they would have been fine. The problem is they rushed it out, and now they're paying the price for it. And now they're scrambling, trying to fix it. And it looks like they could do that if they handled this whole TV series, let's just call it the whole New Republic era. Because, yes, I know a couple of the shows do focus a little bit more in that zone between episodes 3 and 4. I really wish that they would name that. Maybe they can call that the Empire era. I don't know. But there is that chunk of time, and I can understand why people still want to tell stories in that. There's still a lot of fertile ground. I mean, it's been fueling the books for years. But I think this New Republic era is really fascinating, though,
Yeah, I mean, you have some really cool characters. And I think the reason why everybody's so in love with the Mandalorian, everyone's so in love, well, a lot of people like Book of Boba Fett. It's not as, bad as, other people. Some people may make it seem, but I think it's because you got people who truly understand Star Wars and for what it really is. And like I said, I think that goes a great deal because, yes, J.J. Abrams did, in my opinion, he did a great job with Force Awakens. He brought us new characters, new things. It kind of brought us back into that Star Wars universe. And then I think, like I said, just with episode 8 and 9, that's where you started like having the problems, is because now you're introducing somebody else taking over who may not truly understand Star Wars the way that J.J. Abrams does. And and JJ, I don't even think JJ even understands it the way that Dave Filoni does.
No.
Because he didn't sit at the master's feet. You see what I'm saying? Like, so as much as a fan that JJ is of Star Wars, he doesn't understand Star Wars to the degree and the depth that a Filoni does. And so with that being said, and then you take somebody with Rian Johnson, you started getting further and further away from the creator, if you will. And then now you're starting to have all these problems. And so that's really like the downfall of the whole sequel thing. And then now you're trying to play catch up. Now you're trying to fix it and throw JJ back at the end of it. And it's like, okay, well, he's not used to cleaning up a Star Wars mess. You see what I'm saying? Like, Filoni could have done that because he understands Star Wars to the degree that he would have been able to probably like, okay, this is what we do and this is how we save it. But like going into this whole, New Republic era, yeah, that's a great sandbox to play in because you still have a lot of time. There's a lot of time to tell a lot of stories. And like I said, you bring in the Ahsoka series, which is Dave Filoni's baby. You bring in Thrawn, those types of things, bring in characters that people already love. And we know Filoni can handle it because he did it well with even the animated series. So once again, you bring in somebody who understands it to that depth and then let them take it. And you can kind of, like we said, just kind of go around the sequel trilogy and you can take, events like, okay, well, what's Ezra Bridger doing now? And this was going on, while the sequel trilogy was going on. Ezra was in his band of people are kind of going off and doing this. And now we pick it up from where they left off, and we needn't have to deal with the sequel trilogy after that.
Well, I mean, and what's interesting about this too is that, I mean, there's just so much to unpack with that. I mean, first of all this stuff with Ezra Bridger, everything like that, that was established even before the original trilogy, technically, because that was all in Rebels. So really, one of the things, because to me, you could do three things with this. One, you can continue on telling the where are they now, we'll call it, stories, right? So it's kind of like, okay, here's a dude from Rebels. Hey, what's he doing now? And you could really do that multiple times, because let's not forget that a lot of these series, at least as far as we know with Ahsoka, we know with the Book of Boba Fett and the Mandalorian, they're all taking place around this 6 years after Return of the Jedi time. So they're really kind of in this little sweet spot where they can kick off this era. But you also have 6 years of time between Return of the Jedi and around where these series are taking place. And man, you could tell just some incredible stories in that. And then you're still at the point where you're about 24 years before The Force Awakens. So now you have something like 4 times the amount of years to tell if you deal with that time period, which is the second thing. They can actually go to various points. And one of the things that I had brought up while you were not around was the fact that I had answered somebody's Twitter thing. They were saying, which should I actually watch next? Should I watch, because they're just about to finish Clone Wars, and they said, should I go Bad Batch? Should I go Rebels? And, you know, some people were saying Rebels, some people were saying Bad Batch. And it's like, well, okay. Yeah, if you want to go chronologically, technically you would do Bad Batch. But the problem is, and this is what I compared them to, you have certain series, certain films, certain whatever. It doesn't matter what medium it is. It could even be a book. But you have certain ones that are like these little cornerstones, right? They're like bricks. And then you have these other things that are more like the cement that goes in between the bricks that kind of connects them together. And that's the thing. Rebels and Clone Wars are bricks. The Bad Batch is more like the cement because it's really more world building. It's telling you, here's what happened as a result of the Clone Wars. And here's some things that we're foreshadowing that's going to be a key point in Rebels. So I said for that reason, it's always good if you're trying to do a Star Wars thing, especially now that we're getting all this content, it's probably a good idea to hit the bricks and then go for the cement. Again, you could enjoy it either way, but it's going to make sense to you because you watch Clone Wars, then you go to Rebels, and then when you go back and watch the Bad Batch, you're going to start getting all these references like, oh, okay, this is, things are going to click better. And I think that that's what's happening with this New Republic era, is what I think they're going to do is they're going to start seeding out these key group of series. So like 6 years after Return of the Jedi, we get not the Bad Batch, Ahsoka, Book of Boba Fett, Mandalorian, right? Then maybe they'll pick 15 years after Return of the Jedi, and maybe they'll have 2 or 3 series that take place there. And then maybe another one at 25 years. And so that will establish your points, of lore. And then you have the connective tissue that you can put out in between those.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's really kind of a thing with Star Wars, because of when they're you're dropping things at different points in time, and we're bouncing all over the timelines. It's not going in necessarily a linear fashion. So 1 minute you got we're 6 years after Return of the Jedi. Oh nope, now we're going to Andor, or now we're doing Obi-Wan, then we're going to Andor, and then now we're bouncing back. So no, we got Ahsoka that takes place within that 6-year box, and it's a lot of jumping around.
Yeah, so mostly because they got a lot of catching up to do. Lucas basically restrained everybody for decades, And now it's kind of like, oh, now you can tell official stories. You know, they're trying to seed out different. And keep in mind, they haven't even touched the High Republic era yet.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I always, and I often wonder, like, okay, when Disney bought Lucasfilm, was the High Republic even considered, or did that not just come till later? Like
Yeah.
when did this stuff come into play? You see what I'm saying? So,
Well, the High Republic, I think, if I remember correctly, because I remember we actually did a show on this. It was it was earlier. I don't know at what point in the production period we were at, because, we were audio only first, and then we went to like single wide shot camera thing, and then multicam switch. Then, we went through various points of production, but I remember we did a show where they had first done an interview with all those authors that came up with the High Republic. And I don't know if that was something that they all just decided, like, hey, let's all work on it had to have been a directive. Either one of and I can't remember. I'd actually have to go back and rewatch the show. Maybe I'll do that. It'll give us another view. But basically, it was something to the effect of either one of the authors or a series of them came up with an idea, and then Lucasfilm, i.e. Kathleen Kennedy, greenlit it and said, yeah, go ahead. And then they all got into a room, and they basically hashed out the whole storyline. And then they started going, okay, here's how we're going to divide it up. The other thing, though, is that it could have been a situation that's kind of what you're alluding to, that maybe this is one of the things that they were thinking about doing, and then they finally got around to kicking it to the authors and saying, hey, you guys need to try to do something with this, and that was the catalyst of that. So I don't know. That's a good question, because I'm going to go out on a limb and say probably not, because these guys didn't even plan the sequel trilogy properly, and you would think that would have been priority number one. We do have a couple of chats here from Ronaldo.
Okay.
Ronaldo says, do you think all the stuff between episodes 6 and 7 and 3 and 4 will all be shows? It's actually funny that you bring that up. We're going to address that in just 1 minute. That's actually our next point in this article that we're covering from InsideTheMagic.net. He goes on to say, I think it will. Now he's answering the question. And High Republic and everything beyond Episode 9, with the exception of Acolyte, will be movies. Well, the Acolyte is interesting, because the Acolyte is really the first show that we know of that is sort of dancing around the High Republic, because it takes place towards the end of the era. So it's not it's not really direct. It's more indirectly tied to it. Although there was didn't we talk about some rumor or something like that at one point, that they were actually working on a High Republic series of some sort?
Well, I know they were speculating about even a trilogy of movies. Some people feel like that might be what Rian Johnson's working on. Some even speculate that's what Taika Waititi is doing. He's kind of maybe kicking something off. Even at Kevin Feige, some people even think that his thing might be looming back there as a.
Well, that's a good one. Why don't you guys let us know in the comments section right now, write in or chat in what you guys think is going to be I guess the best medium that High Republic. Do you think it's going to be a movie? You think it's going to be a TV show? I want to know what you guys are thinking on that one.
Or it could be. Seeing is that it's based on books and comics, why not another animated series?
Well, that's what I would lean towards, honestly. I honestly think I was sort of disappointed, actually. I don't know. I'll reserve judgment, because I think Filoni's next animated series was that Tales of the Jedi thing. But I was disappointed. I was hoping that maybe they would do a High Republic-centric series, especially since, it's kind of hot right now. Ronaldo says, the best thing, all caps, so he means it. The best thing about Acolyte is that it's out of the Skywalker saga. I want more of this. And then, of course, he goes on to say, I think all High Republic will be movies. Okay. So that's Ronaldo. I mean, we got people watching. Just Ronaldo's the only one chatting today.
I don't know if it's going to be all movies, though.
I don't think so. I don't doubt that
Yeah.
it'll eventually go to the movies. And then maybe what you were talking
Yeah.
about, like maybe it's Taika Waititi saying, maybe it's Kevin Feige saying, maybe it's Ryan Johnson. You know, I mean, we could see something. Because to me, what they should probably do, I get the trilogy thing because it's a little bit easier to flesh out a longer story arc. So you could tell something with a little bit more complexity, especially when you're introducing a new era. But it just seems to me like, maybe what they should do is try to come up with a self-contained story set in the High Republic universe and get out the characters you want to put out there first, and maybe do a single film. Just a one-and-done film that's a self-contained story just to see how the fans react to it. Because by doing that, what you can do is not only are you going to see if people are into it, right? Because you have to do that. But the other thing that it does is that you get that fan feedback, and they'll tell you what they liked about it and what they didn't like about it, and then you can tweak that and then come out with your trilogy.
That's true. That's true. I think, but also I think, the cool thing about that is, the cool thing of doing a trilogy, though, is that there's no expectations. Well, because now we do have source material now,
That's
but
why.
it's very limited, though.
Yeah.
It's a limited. It's not like,
Well, it's not
it's
that
kind of like
limited because
40,
those
50.
books are on the bestseller list.
Well, what I mean by limited is like there's not a whole lot of books out. It's not like
Oh no,
you
there's
got like
quite a
30.
few.
Well, I'm not saying like you got like 30
I mean, I'm
books
not trying
out,
to
though.
contradict everything you're saying.
Well, what I'm saying is like you have source material that one is written by your current crop of people, um, that Disney has afforded the opportunity to write these novels in the first place, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like you're trying to like take a Timothy Zahn thing and trying to bring it. You know what I mean? Like these are your people. Like you kind of picked these folks to kind of tell your High Republic stories in book form anyway. So you could kind of take that and then just do a trilogy, because I think that the trilogy will probably, it might work a little bit better because it's not focused around the Skywalker saga. See, that's the problem with the sequels, is that you're still holding on to Han, Luke, and Leia, and so because of that, you're gonna have some issues. But when you start off fresh with a bunch of brand new characters that okay, moviegoers are like, all right, well, what's a skier? What I mean, it's kind of like now you're set to kind of set it to where you want it to be.
Yeah, and I mean, I get it. You could do that. It's just the only problem, though, is that you could run into a situation that you run into with some of the Marvel things, where they start to go on this path. And again, it is all about taking risks, and you can't play it too safe. But my point being that with Star Wars in the shape that it's in now, you don't want to take a bunch of risks. This is especially if you start talking about the film level. Now, if they did a High Republic, see, what they really should do, even before they do any of these movies, whether it's a standalone or a trilogy, is do an animated series. Establish some of this stuff. Because, look, yes, the books are widely read. It's not like there's a small group of people reading them. But, I mean, let's face it. Within the Star Wars, I guess, perspective, right? I mean, if you just kind of draw a little box around that, the moviegoers, that's where all your casual fans are going to go. If you want the biggest bang for the buck, as far as your audience goes, you're going to do a movie. But what you can do is, if you do an animated series, the cool thing about that is it flies enough under the radar. Like, you get a good sampling because you're going to get the hardcore fans. So they're going to tell you what's good and what's bad about it. And if you could figure that out and flesh that out and take notes on it, then you can do your movie and bring in the rest of the class, so to speak. And then you have a much safer bet. Because right now, I just think that you have to do safe bets. You can't take any more risks with Star Wars. You don't have that many credits, let's just say, left. I mean, it's kind of on that threshold. Most franchises would have caved by now. I mean, they're lucky that it's Star Wars, but it's like, look, even Star Wars is...
How many blows to the shield can it take?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, as powerful and nearly bulletproof of a franchise as this is, there's only so many hits it can take before you're going to start losing revenue. So,
yeah.
Getting to Ronaldo, because I said Ronaldo, we're going to actually deal with this thing in a second here. Speaking of the films, one of the biggest things, and again, it's so funny because when I was reading this article, it's not me breaking my arm, patting myself on the back here. It's just funny to me that you actually do see a lot of these points that I've been making over the last year and a half are brought up in this article. And another one is it's talking about a big crossover film. And I remember when you and I were talking about the best way of, how do we handle the post-Skywalker saga films? And, of course, we did this whole show about the future of Star Wars is actually Thrawn. If you haven't checked that out, go check that out. But just don't check it out right now because you want to finish watching this. But, once you guys go and start exploring the rest of our videos, find that one. That's a really good one because we do point out why Thrawn really is the key to Star Wars' survival moving forward. And we present what I feel, anyway, is a very compelling argument. And, hey, if you disagree, leave it in the comment section of that video. But the point being that Thrawn is going to be brought up later in this article. But as an example, you have all these shows that are taking place during the same time period. And you're having crossover within the shows, right? Boba Fett appears in The Mandalorian. The Mandalorian appears in the Book of Boba Fett. Ahsoka appears in both of them. I'm sure both of them are going to appear in Ahsoka. So you have some of this crossover. A story starts here, like when in the Ahsoka series, or not the Ahsoka series, in The Mandalorian, when Ahsoka says, where's Thrawn? Well, okay, you're establishing and foreshadowing what we're probably going to see in Ahsoka. Okay, great. So, what this article is talking about, which is something that you and I have talked about on many of our shows, is that it would make sense for all of these to eventually come together in a crossover film. And that's pretty much what this thing is talking about. It's like the crossovers within the series have helped to launch new series, right? Because Ahsoka appearing in Boba Fett and The Mandalorian is now going to help her launch her own series. And
well, maybe this is what Kathleen Kennedy was talking about, like this whole big culmination thing.
Yeah.
Maybe that's it.
Well, and I'm sure it is. And and the article basically says it would make sense if it were a movie or a trilogy. And I could see that. I mean, I could see them, because the idea that I had put forth at the time, because we were saying what was the best way to handle all these shows and movies and, what do you do? And I think I said something to the effect of what you need to do for at least the next, 5 years, let's say. Of course, that's not what's happening, right? I mean, but let's just say 5-10 years. What you do is you could do it either from single series point of view, or you could do it like the article is saying, the crossover point of view. Because I think my original point was something to the effect of, you have, say, The Mandalorian, right? The end of every season, or every couple of seasons, or let's say you have a story arc that goes across 2 or 3 seasons, it can end in a film. And then it's almost a weird way about how Marvel does it. Because Marvel, will have all their standalone films that then culminate into the Avengers. And then the Avengers film marks the end of that phase. And then you get another batch of standalone films that launch the new phase that end in another Avengers movie. And that's kind of the way they had been doing it. Now, they could do that sort of the same way here. And even using Inside the Magic.net's idea, you can have this whole crossover thing, right, with The Mandalorian, Boba Fett, Ahsoka. And maybe you have all this stuff, they're appearing in each other's shows and all this other stuff. And you have this big story arc, excuse me, that actually goes across all the series. And then that ends in a movie. Or if they wanted to do a trilogy, a trilogy I think might be a little bit too much. Because the problem with a trilogy is you're already going to be on to the next seasons or the next big story arc of the shows by the next year. And, you know, the other problem, too, is that if you do the movies, you're going to tie up those actors in the movies. So now you're not going to get, you know, say they did a movie after season 4 of The Mandalorian, season 3 of The Book of Boba Fett, and season 2 of Ahsoka. Okay. Now you're saying, okay, great, we're going to do a trilogy of films now. Well, okay, now you're not going to get the next season of those shows for probably another 3 years. And that's not going to fly. So, you know, we'll just have to see kind of how that goes.
Yeah, it's a lot of different ways. I mean, like I said, we just have to see what type of planning they've actually done, what they come up with. I mean, Star Wars is in a weird space, no pun intended. There's some good things and there's some, not so good things that's going on. But I think ultimately, we have to just see what Filoni and Kathleen Kennedy really kind of come up with, along with Favreau. Because, I think, like I said, just going around the sequel trilogy, I think that's the best idea. And, getting far away from the Skywalker, thing is the best idea. And then you can almost kind of start fresh and then hopefully go from there.
Well, what's interesting is, so you have a new character like Din, but then you have classic characters like Boba Fett, and then you have now classic characters like Ahsoka, right? So what's cool is you're tying in that familiarity. So you're getting away from the Skywalker saga, which is the context in which we've seen a lot of these characters, including Din, because he's interacting with Luke, right? So you're seeing these characters in the context of the Skywalker saga, but now that they're introduced, like you said, they can move beyond it. Right. Ronaldo's got a couple of chats I want to get to here. He says, going back to the Acolyte, maybe they'll use the Acolyte as a test to see if this era works. And if it does, they'll use it more.
That's a good point.
That's true. I could see that, because I think the answer to that, though, is going to depend greatly on how much of the High Republic they actually include in the Acolyte. Remember, the Acolyte is not technically a High Republic show. It just takes place during the High Republic. Now, it would stand to reason that just like a show might take place, during the Clone Wars, that you're probably going to see references. A good example would be Andor, right? Because we know we're going to flash back. We know we're going to see what sort of shaped him as a separatist and all that. So you're going to have to reference some of this stuff. So, I mean, I don't know what you're thinking about this, but for me, I think that if you want to talk about, this is a good way to test the waters with the High Republic era, it really depends on how much of that they include in the show.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, and what I guess we have to find out what the Acolyte is, and what type of character. You know what I mean? Because it's like we really don't know.
I know. I get it.
The High Republic, we have source material on that, so we know. Okay, this is the golden age of the Jedi. You have, these different, villains that we've kind of already established, and then you move to the Acolyte, where it's like, okay, well, the Acolyte is kind of like this. Sounds like this whole, reemergence of the Sith, but
Well, that's
it
probably
just
exactly what
depends
it
on.
is, though. I mean, I actually
Yeah,
think
and
that you're
it
right
just
about that, you know?
it just depends on how they handle, like, well,
Mm-hmm.
what the story is for the Acolyte, and like you said, it could, you know, it could maybe bring up some stuff like, okay, well, maybe this kicks off maybe something after the Acolyte, maybe. I don't know. It's kind of a hard thing because, like I said, we
We don't
don't
know
know. We don't have
enough.
a whole lot
Yeah,
have a lot of information on it.
we really don't. He goes on to say, for a moment, I thought you were talking about a crossover with another franchise. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it could be Star Trek. Heaven knows we bring it up enough. There it is. There's your Star Trek reference. He says, I don't think they'll use trilogies again. This is Ronaldo again. I'm not against them not doing it. Okay, so you're not against them not using trilogies. I have to think about this. Yeah, I mean, I know what you mean because again, I'm starting to really get a little bit more into because I think you can do that.
Standalones.
Yeah, because I think you can do that now. You know, we know enough about this universe. There's been enough source material, and even if you just deal with the films, you're pretty much there. If you include the films, the live action, and animated shows, you're definitely there. And then, man, I mean, if you include the books too, I mean, look, this universe has been well laid out. I don't necessarily think that you always have to tell a story that has to stretch across 3 movies.
Well, I think and I think you have to have a story that's worth that.
Well, if they do the High
Because if you really,
Republic, then absolutely, because that's like a
yeah.
new thing, right? We don't know anything about that.
Well, what I mean by that is that, okay, you have so okay, we got the original trilogy. We got the story of Luke, Han and Leia, Obi-Wan, okay, Vader, Palpatine. Okay, cool. We had the original trilogy. That was one thing. And then the prequels were perfect because you can set up, okay, well, what happened? How did this even, where did the Empire come from? Like, you're explaining it in a completely different trilogy. How did Vader become Vader? There's so much to that. But my thing is, like, everything doesn't deserve a trilogy. Like,
Exactly.
some things, if you have a story that that you need to flush out truly in a trilogy type thing, where you can really world, but I mean, like I said, the High Republic, because it has enough source material to do that, sure. But
Well, it's not even so much that it has enough source material to me, as much as it is that there's not a whole lot. I guess it's never been represented in a film thing, so people need to see that, right? Because it's only been in books. See, I wouldn't
mhm.
necessarily feel that way if it was an animated show. Like, if you had like 4 seasons of a High Republic show, I might be on board with a single film. But given that that era has never been represented in film, then I would agree that a trilogy would be necessary. Whereas, I'll give you a really good example, and you can tell me what you're thinking of this. I think they probably could have streamlined the Obi-Wan series and made it into a really good, tight, concise single film. In fact, a fan did
I would
that.
agree.
Fan did that.
Yeah,
They made it like a 2-hour cut or something. It's like on YouTube somewhere. But I guess
I
they
agree.
edited the thing, you know?
Yeah, that could have very well have happened.
And I think that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Because that era, of course, has been well established. So you could tell a single story that takes place, in something familiar, and then just do a one and done. Not everything has to be a trilogy. Look at Rogue One. Rogue One's probably the shining example. It's the only pretty much untouchable, like everybody loves First of all, it's probably everybody's favorite Disney era film.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even more so than The Force Awakens, because The Force Awakens, I mean, the cool thing about that was the worst people said about it was derivative. That was like the worst criticism that it got. For the most part, though, it was pretty universally loved, and everybody was heralding the return of Star Wars. But Rogue One, which of course followed it, you know, I think that part of the, you know, everybody looks at The Last Jedi effect, and that is, you know, The Last Jedi left a bad taste in everybody's mouth, and so it killed Solo, it killed anything that came after it, right? But the other thing that I think that people are ignoring, which is why I think, I mean, look, there's some problems with The Last Jedi. You know, there's a tonal thing. I mean, it's well documented, not just by us, right? Our second show ever, I think, was a review of the thing, which I would love to actually go back and check out and see if I still agree with it. Like, do I agree with everything I said? You know, it's almost like, should we do like, and I've actually thought about this, you know, during slow periods, like in between shows or something. Now that we've been on this show for a while, it might be kind of interesting to go back, especially because when we did all that, it was like audio only.
Mm-hmm.
And we only did The Last Jedi, maybe Rogue One, and then Rise of Skywalker. Well, maybe Solo too. But it would be interesting to go back and actually do reviews of all the films. You know, so I've been playing around with that idea too. And that might actually be some of the bonus content. You know, we actually have one supporter so far that's at master level. And one of the things that if you support us, whether it's $5, $10, $25 a month, is you get like these special videos. And that would actually be a good incentive video, is if we actually released, you know, reviews of all the films. So if you want to see that, click that Buy Me the Coffee link below and support us, even at $5 a month, you know. Get enough people to do that, it can help this channel grow and continue. And, you know, while you're doing that, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. I have to keep bringing that up. People have told me I don't say that enough. I always just bring it up almost as an afterthought at the end of the show. But yeah, I think honestly that when you look at these trilogies versus single films, in a lot of ways, I just think that you could get it in a one-and-done situation. And it not only does it depend on the era, and I think this is something that you were talking about too, I think it depends on the story you want to tell too.
Yeah.
Okay. So now the next point, you know, is basically talking about that we'll probably see the Mandalorian in a movie. You know, and nobody's really sure, like I said, what the next film's going to be. I mean, and we keep getting different reports. Like, first it was announced that Rogue Squadron was actually going to be the next theatrically released film. Mm-hmm. And then it became, nope. That's not going to happen now. That's been shelved. And ever since then, you know, it's been rumored that it's Taika Waititi's film. And then, of course, you know, he does a whole, forgets that Natalie Portman was actually in Star Wars. And then it's sort of like, well, you know what? Maybe he's not going to, I'm not saying he can't do one. I'm just saying maybe we wait until you do a little bit more homework on Star Wars and then we turn you loose, right? Kevin Feige, of course, has been mentioned. Lots of stuff. Now, here's what's interesting. As far as I know, they have not changed that December 2023 release date, which we're only a year and a half away from that. So something's got to be in the works, right? They're not just going to be like, we got 8 months. Let's go make a movie now. So
yeah, you got to wonder what that is.
Well, that's why I think it strengthens this idea that it could be, if it's not something that the Mandalorian appears in, it could be a Mandalorian movie. And honestly, to me, that would be their smartest move. Because the Mandalorian is the most popular Star Wars Disney Plus show. It's a character that everybody loves. Because it's more like the flagship show, right? Like a lot of the stuff during this era has basically seeded off of this thing. it's anchoring a lot of those storylines, which means that you could actually weave things in without necessarily interrupting the integrity of whatever they got planned for season 3 and beyond. You know, you could probably squeeze a film in there and it doesn't mess with anything. That might be the way to go.
This is the way.
This is, yeah, exactly. This is the way. You know, and I mean, and who knows? You know, the article goes on to say, you know, that maybe they kill him off or something, but it's like, yeah, they're not gonna kill off the Mandalorian. And then, of course, you know, let me put this up now because this is kind of our main thing. Now we're getting to Thrawn. Why Thrawn will be the antagonist. Now, of course, again, we did this whole entire show about why Thrawn, not only is he going to be the antagonist of Ahsoka, most likely, but he's going to be, and I think we talked even in a separate show about Thrawn being sort of the overall big villain, right? Because you had Moff Gideon in The Mandalorian, you had the Pikes and all those guys in Book of Boba Fett, and then, of course, you have Thrawn and Ahsoka probably, but it's almost like Thrawn's really pulling the strings of all of these people and guiding that. But, you know, of course, they reference the whole Rebels episodes, and at the season 4 finale, you know, he went into hyperspace with Ezra, and we know that Ezra's going to appear. And if Ezra's around, Thrawn's probably around. And then Ahsoka's promised to find him, but it's been years. Thrawn and Ezra would have been missing for like 12 years at this point. So, you know, he could have gotten back with the Imperials. And again, it mentions that maybe he's hooked up with Gideon. You know, and Thrawn, of course, has a loyalty within the Empire that it would make sense. Because don't forget, his whole creation was basically him leading the charge after Palpatine. That you had all these people, and this is where the Mandalorian kind of follows Heir to the Empire a little bit, where it talks about after the Empire fell, that you had these factions. You would have these various Moffs, Grand Moffs, Admirals, and stuff like that, all pretty much cobbling together a fleet or something, and they're all fighting for power. It's this whole big power struggle. Who's going to be the next Palpatine, essentially? Right? Because with Vader and Palpatine both gone, it's open season. There's nobody to unify the thing. So, you know, you have that. And then, of course, it talks about Thrawn could clone Palpatine and is using Gideon to get Grogu's blood in order to reanimate him. You know, and again, it's talking about how Filoni basically found a great way to incorporate Thrawn into this new canon that we have. So, yeah, boy, there's a lot on Thrawn here. See, again, this is the longest section of this article is talking about Thrawn. You know, it's talking about his strengths and weaknesses and some of the differences between Heir to the Empire and the current canon, and then it's talking about this crossover event. Became one of the next Star Wars movies. It makes sense that Thrawn would be the villain. Of course, Ahsoka would have to call for help to stop him. It would almost be like a Star Wars Avengers thing at that point, right? You'd have to have, well, just kind of what you saw in a way at the end of Boba Fett, where he called in all of his little reinforcements. And then, you know, obviously the next point is they're not going to ditch the original sequel trilogy because, you know, they put in too much time. So what do you have to say about this whole Thrawn stuff?
Well, I still stand and say that Thrawn is the future. I think he's the most compelling and, you know, interesting and powerful character that we already have, you know, established. We never, and the cool thing is that he was introduced to Rebels, and we never really saw the end of him. So to bring him into a live action series would be awesome. And I think he will draw in a lot of people. He's cool looking, he's very calculating, and a lot of people love those type of characters. You know, those, you watch these spy movies like Mission Impossible and something like that, and you have these really smart, brilliant, calculating people. Law Abiding Citizen is another movie that had someone who was really smart, calculated, you know, and he was cool. Like I said, when we saw him in Rebels, just how he thinks, and because he's a part of that regime, we're around with Vader and Palpatine, and he can be that bridge, like now to take it, or that conduit to take Star Wars into that next level, because he's such a, like I said, he's such a compelling character, and he's such a cool character, that hasn't really fully been flushed out yet. And you got all these books, you got all this stuff. You have a clever way of doing things, because now you could talk about, okay, well, Ezra, what happened in those 12 years you were gone? Like, what the heck was Thrawn doing? What information? There's so many different stories you can tell.
Well, and it's like you said, Thrawn really is the only one who is established, both in the expanded universe. I mean, we've lived with this guy since 1991. And he has long been established to be, while not as technically powerful as Palpatine or even Vader, he kind of is in his own way. And he's definitely the only one who could actually command the entire empire and bring it back under one central rule. Oh, by the way, before you continue, one Pablo says, "Yo, what's going on, man? Glad to see you."
I think that with Thrawn, though, it's like I said, he's a very formidable foe. And the fact that he can do it without the Force is even more interesting, because it's kind of like he's like the Lex Luthor, basically.
Oh, completely.
Against all these Superman, pretty much. It's like that's Thrawn. He's Lex Luthor. And
yeah, I never really thought about that analogy, actually. And by the way, just because we got another little bit of viewer explosion here. It's a reminder, guys, hit that like button, especially the like button. Like button helps us. If you haven't already done so, hit the subscribe button too. We'd love to have you guys be notified. And, if you want to do a one-time donation to us or join one of our little monthly package programs, there's a Buy Me a Coffee link down below where it says actually Buy Me a Blue Milk. So appreciate the help, but I digress. Please continue.
No, but yeah, I think he's definitely, like I said, that he plays the chess game. He plays the long game. And that's what makes him so, and he's always so calm. You never really see him get frazzled or anything like that. And you never really saw Palpatine or Vader really get frazzled to it much either. So he kind of fits into that, I'm in control, I'm the bad guy, you almost can't stop me. But he's very cool. But don't get it twisted, though. He's a formidable fighter. Like, he knows how to fight, and he's very good, and he studies people. That's the thing about him. It's his mind, it's his intellect that makes him so dangerous.
Well, here's the thing that's interesting.
What's going to be cool.
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, it was just intriguing when you brought this up, because I never really thought about it. I always called him the Sherlock Holmes of the Star Wars universe. And, I mean, that does apply, but I think the Lex Luthor of the Star Wars universe is probably even more fitting. Because if you really look at the way that he is and the way the Lex is, and not only are they similar that way, but it's kind of like you said, they're both, now granted with, I guess you can count Luke Skywalker maybe, but where Thrawn has a little bit of a thing is that he has to be somewhat subservient to these extremely powerful Force users. And so in order to achieve his end and what he wants, he has to then know how to work around that. It's almost kind of like how Batman has to, right? With some of the, he comes up against these supervillains, it's like, well, okay, I gotta figure out something that I could do, because I can't match these guys with physical strength. So I have to use intellect, cunning, strategy, all this other stuff. I just have to out-strategize. And that's usually, see, this is where Vader and I guess Palpatine too would be a little bit more like Brainiac, because what happens in a lot of times a superhero, particularly DC, but Marvel is the same way. These guys tend to rely on their strength because they're so powerful and they can just pretty much mow through anybody, right? They don't really have to rely on brains too much because they could just, it doesn't matter. You know, they could just achieve their will through pure physical or
just force.
Yeah. You know, whereas
force.
Yeah.
But that's the thing about Thrawn. The Thrawn, I mean, Palpatine is like that because like he orchestrated this whole thing. You know,
well,
so
yeah,
that's
he
like,
has both. Brainiac, if you go to the comic book side, he has both.
Yeah, he's like, that's the thing about Palpatine was like he's super smart and cunning, but he's also massively powerful too. So either way you go with him, I mean, that's what made Palpatine like pretty much like the ultimate villains, because it's almost like you can't really truly stop him almost in a way. Thrawn, though, like you said, with his him being more immortal, shall we say, so he has to really be mindful because, you know, he doesn't fight with a lightsaber. He doesn't, you know, have the Force. And so now he has to, like you said, he has to find ways to circumvent those who do. And he often does, you know, and that's the thing that makes him so cool. And that's what made Lex Luthor so cool, is the fact that, you know, he was able to stay a step ahead of Superman a lot of times because he always had to anticipate, you know, and think those, you know, 4 or 5 moves ahead.
Well, and again, I think it just comes down to, it's a no-brainer to use Thrawn in this whole thing, because not only does he make sense, not only is he been one of the longest-lasting characters. I mean, there's just so many reasons that he would be the main villain. But one thing that you brought up, too, that I wanted to point out before I move on to the next thing, before I forget it, is that, yeah, so, you know, Palpatine has his whole cunning, and again, we... kind of funny. It's like I'm endlessly plugging our past shows here, but we did do a show on what makes Palpatine so powerful. And, you know, it would be super cool because actually I think for some reason people dislike that one. I got like 6 dislikes on it or something. It was for some, I don't know what it was about that particular show. Maybe we weren't on our game that day. I don't know. Or maybe people disagreed with us. Yeah. Well, and it's kind of like, this is what I always say. I mean, we're lucky in the sense that most of the people like our show, right? So the people that do watch generally like it, generally give us a like, and that's cool. And it's one of those things where I think we got maybe a couple of dislikes on like 1 or something like that on another. It's very rare, though. You know, we actually have a really good rating that way, but it just cracks me up because my whole thing is like, all right, man, it's one thing if you're gonna just be like, okay, I don't really like this or whatever, and you just watch something else. But I mean, if you're actually gonna take the time to go and hit that dislike button, it's like, okay, you obviously feel strongly. Let us know why. Let us know what it is you didn't like. And I might as well say that while I'm talking about it here right now, is, you know, if there's something that you guys would like to see us do, or maybe some sort of a direction or whatever, or if there's something, you know, you kind of, I don't know, there's things you like about the show, but maybe there's some things you don't like about what we do, let us know, because we're always trying to improve the show. And after all, we make this for you guys. I mean, let's face it, Daryl and I could just sit in a room or go to a restaurant and just talk about Star Wars. We don't have to do it on camera. We're doing it on camera because we're trying to bring you guys into it. So, you know, let us know how we're doing. Just don't hit that dislike button. Like button only. But one of the things that I wanted to bring up, though, before we move on to the next point, is that while Palpatine is powerful, and he is cunning, and he is highly strategic, so is Vader. But what's interesting about Vader is it's almost like it's different, right? It's coming from a slightly different perspective. I mean, obviously, look, Palpatine's way more powerful, at least at the time, and pretty much he's more strategic because Vader still relies a lot on emotion and hatred and fear in a sense. He has control. It's really, I mean, really, when you sit there and analyze Vader's power, and that might actually make a good Monday topic at some point, is to actually analyze Vader's power and his whole thing. Like we did what makes Palpatine so powerful, we do like a what makes Vader so powerful, and then we go and do, maybe we make it a series. You know, what makes Luke so powerful? What? See? I'm thinking on this show. I'm actually like using my brain and everything. So, yeah.
How Thrawn of you.
I know, right? But here's the thing. Vader's strategy and his mind and the way he works is different from Palpatine. And then Thrawn is different from each of those guys. So you basically have this trio of characters who are each, not only are they different in perhaps their evilness or their end goal or whatever, you know, their, I don't know, whatever they're trying to achieve.
Their motivation.
Yeah, their motives. Yep. There you go. Their motivation. I mean, not only do you have a difference in that, but you also have a difference in how each one of them approaches it. That's one of the reasons why I think people really were into the Thrawn trilogy so much with Heir to the Empire, Dark Force Rising, and Last Command, is because now you had Thrawn, who is in charge of the Empire, very much like a Vader or a Palpatine, but he was different. He ran it differently. You know, I remember there were even a lot of references where people are like, wow, you know, I thought you were going to like choke some dude out or something. And Thrawn's like, look, I'm not trying to do that. You know, that doesn't make any sense. You know, I remember there was a thing in the Darth Vader comic book that cracked me up because it's a joke that everybody made during the original trilogy. And, you know, because Vader got mad at some Imperial officer, you know, they were meeting with Palpatine or something, and of course Vader like choked him out or sliced him with a lightsaber or something. And Palpatine just ended up saying something to the effect like, look, man, we're going to start to run out of guys if you keep doing this, you know. It's I mean, I thought it was, man. Dude, I thought it was the funniest thing in the world because you got Palpatine. Like, Palpatine's like, look, you know, I'm not going to stop you. I'm just saying, you know, you might want to slow down on choking out all your best people because, I mean, you know, I got to replace these guys. So that was a really good moment, I thought. But the final point that they made in this article, again, this came from inside the magic.net. And as I said, the very beginning of the show, when it was just me, and of course we brought this up on other shows as well, is that a lot of times we'll run across these articles. Daryl and I are sending them back and forth. And, you know, we're like you guys, you know, we discuss them. It's kind of like, hey, I just read this the other day. What do you think of that? And we bring that to you guys. So this whole thing we thought was really fascinating. Came from InsideTheMagic.net, and it was talking about, you know, is there going to be a new sequel trilogy? And how are they going to handle it? And the final point of this thing was basically them saying, what about Han, Luke, and Leia, and Chewie, and all those guys? Are we going to see them? And of course, and I agree with the assessment, obviously, is that no, that would be pointless. If we're trying to get away from that. You could possibly have Chewbacca come in, but that probably wouldn't happen. You could have Yoda come in if you're doing a High Republic thing because he's around during that time. And I think that would be a good way to bridge it. But pretty much, and you're probably in agreement with me on this, that they should just stay away from the classic characters for this. I mean, I don't mind Luke being in The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett and all that because it does make sense during that time period.
Right. Absolutely, yeah. I completely agree. Like, the more you start holding on to these older characters, man, unless you're talking about the High Republic, that makes sense. But like, other than that, it's like, yeah, we got to move on because otherwise, you know, we're going to lose the franchise, and you know, that would be a terrible waste.
Well, and not to mention the fact that I could see maybe a situation where what they do is they have them, right? Like right now we have Luke during this time period. It's 6 years after Return of the Jedi. It makes sense to have Luke around, but as they get further and further in time, they could actually just weave it away to where you don't necessarily have to worry about what Luke's doing. You have to establish it now because we don't know. I mean, we know that he rebuilt the Jedi Order and all this stuff, but you need to see that, right? Especially because it's referenced in the sequel trilogy. So in that sense, it can act as a prequel because it's like, okay, now we're going to show Luke establishing the Jedi Order and all that, and here's how he did it, and oh, look, Ahsoka helped him a little bit and guided him, and, you know, you get a little bit of that. Hey, my father's former Padawan is helping me out, you know, and then, of course, everybody's heads explodes, and, I mean, you keep moving on from that, right? But then eventually, once that's established, once you go, okay, now we get that, you can move away from that because in the back of your mind, when you're seeing all these unrelated stories, you're going, oh, okay, Luke is probably doing, you know, whatever. And you could probably revisit because, again, when you truly move away from the Skywalker saga is if you do stuff after Episode 9. If you wanted to make something that tied in some of the original characters while we still have them, it's cool, but I think that they should probably slow down on it and establish a completely independent from the original characters thing. Let me get this chat in here from Ronaldo. And I think Ronaldo's basically talking about the same thing we are. He says, look, let's move on from the old characters and make new ones with new stories. And again, I mean, it's been proven that you could do that. I mean, you could even do the same thing pretty much with even prequel era characters if you wanted. I mean, look at that trilogy of books that we got that neither one of us seemed to be able to finish. You know, the Queen's Peril, Queen's Shadow, you know, all that stuff, right? That's basically focusing on Padme. I mean, I'm sure somewhere in there Anakin's going to pop up, but it's really focusing more on her story and her life on Naboo and her adventures. The biggest thing that I brought up was Thrawn and the trilogy of books that I read the first one. I haven't had a chance to read the second two yet, but it's the Thrawn Ascendancy trilogy. Not to get confused with the new Thrawn trilogy that was released a couple years ago. So you had like Thrawn, then you had like Thrawn Treason, and then Thrawn, I forgot the name of the third one, but basically this is Thrawn Ascendancy, Chaos Rising, and then you had Thrawn Ascendancy. You had a couple other ones in this other thing. And basically that takes place completely in the unknown regions, in the Outer Rim, with the Chiss and all that, and it's proof that you can have a compelling story that feels like Star Wars, yet features no original trilogy characters. I mean, to be fair, Anakin did pop in for a cameo, but it was negligible. In other words, if you took that out of the story, it would not affect anything one bit. And so I think that, yes, you do have to get away from the original trilogy characters, and you have to start to wean people off. And I think that they're somewhat doing that with the TV shows they're doing. Because the other thing that you and I pointed out is the fact that there's two schools of thoughts. On one hand, you know, it's like, okay, we need new stories. We need to get away from the characters. But on the other hand, one of the things, the whole reasons why we wanted Lucasfilm out of George Lucas's hands is like, look, we want to see the continuing adventures of these people. I want to see what Han, Luke, and Leia are doing immediately after Return of the Jedi. You know, I mean, I want to see all that stuff. And I mean, certainly weigh in on this, but the only thing that I can maybe suggest as a way around it, of course, you'd have to pump out a lot more content. Maybe you'd do that in an animated show, I don't know. But you'd have to do something to where you can simultaneously tell the Han, Luke, and Leia story along with the other. Like, for instance, remember when we did the show that Heir to the Empire may be the very first Disney Plus film, they could do that. Because Heir to the Empire actually takes place like a year or something after Return of the Jedi. And I had brought this up earlier, that you could actually make that entire trilogy, which was Timothy Zahn's version of 7, 8, and 9, and you could still leave the sequel trilogy intact because they take place so far apart. So why not have both?
That would be cool. I mean, yeah, you just have to, now you got to figure out what you're going to do with the actors as far as de-aging, recast, you know.
Yeah, I mean, and that's basically it. You know, you could either get Alden Ehrenreich back in, you can do all that stuff, you could de-age the characters, or you can animate it and just have Harrison and all those guys do the voices. Find somebody that kind of sounds like, or AI them. That'd be another way to do it. Because you also don't want Harrison Ford sounding like an 80-year-old, which he is.
Right.
You know, I mean, it's, you know, when the guy's like, you know, probably like 35, 36 years old after Return of the Jedi, you know, you don't really want some 80-year-old dude doing his voice. And the AI worked pretty well for Mark Hamill in The Mandalorian or the Book of Boba Fett. So, yeah, maybe that's the way to go. But question is, what do you guys think? I mean, really, it comes down to that with all of this stuff. We talked about a lot of stuff on this show. So there's a lot of things for you guys to put in the comment section. I would say overall, what we would like to know is, what do you think we should get for a new sequel trilogy? Like, how should they handle this? I mean, how many of you guys would actually want just an entire retcon? That would be interesting. You know, I mean, they were profitable films and all that, but maybe if enough people are just like, you know what? I would probably be okay if you just said, okay, sequel trilogy, do-over, you know, that one doesn't exist. Let that be like a World Between Worlds alternate universe thing or something. I mean, let us know. You know, let us know what you guys think they should do moving forward. What should their next movies be? It's a lot we talked about today. So just leave your thoughts in the comment section. Tell us what's on your mind. Like I said, let us know what you guys think we're doing right, what you think we're doing wrong. Hit that like, hit that subscribe button. Support us if you want. There's a link in the description. We love bringing this stuff to you. Now, Monday's show, we're going to be talking about that leaked Mandalorian Season 3 trailer. I told you guys, we were actually supposed to do it last Monday, but we couldn't do it, unfortunately. We couldn't join you guys this past Monday. But we are set to do it this Monday. And we finally found a clean-ish copy. Because let's face it, most of these Mandalorian Season 3 leaked trailers that came from Celebration were people basically just shooting the screen while it was premiering. There has yet to be an officially released trailer yet. But we found one, providing it's still on YouTube. To be honest, I haven't checked. But we'll get one way or the other. And we'll present it to you guys. We'll do a reaction to it. So we'll react to the trailer, and then we'll talk about a lot of things that we've seen. If you guys have seen it, because it's been out for about a couple of weeks now, let us know in the comment section of Monday's show. You can do that right now, actually. Let us know what you guys are thinking about what you saw, what some of the scenes are. Yeah, it's kind of your homework for the weekend, right? Watch the trailer, see what you guys think, see what's going on, you know, and prepare for us. And then maybe you can explain it to us, because I'm sure, I remember watching it, and I'm thinking, like, man, what am I looking at here? Because, again, it's not the best quality in the world, but we're going to get through it. We're going to react to it. So join us Monday night, 8 o'clock Eastern Time. And, hey, till then, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.